Hello, beloveds. Welcome back to Love, Sex, and Magic with me, your host, Melissa Wells. Today's episode is all about boundaries. We're talking with Terri Cole about her new book, Boundary Boss. So, in this episode, we dive deep into boundaries with self, boundaries with family, boundaries with friendships, boundaries with relationships. We talk about codependency, and Terri just is a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and I'm so excited for you guys to listen to this episode. So let's dive in. Go. Terri Cole is a licensed psychotherapist and global relationship and empowerment expert. For over 2 decades, Terri has worked with a diverse group of clients that includes everyone from stay-at-home mums to celebrities and Fortune 500 CEOs. She has a gift for making complex psychological concepts accessible and actionable so that clients and students achieve sustainable change. She inspires over 250,000 people weekly through her blog, social media platforms, signature programs, and her popular podcast, The Terri Cole Show. So Terri Cole, welcome to Love, Sex, and Magic. I'm so grateful to have you here.
I know. I'm so happy to be here.
So you have a brand new book out called Boundary Boss. I want to just dive straight in there. Why did you write it and who is it for?
Well, it's for everybody. And really, I wrote it because I was such a boundary disaster and didn't know that that's what it was in my younger life. And yeah, they say, you teach what you most need to learn. Well, I believe that that is accurate. So in my own life, I saw that all these painful experiences I had were connected to not knowing what the hell boundaries were, not being able to talk true, as I call it. And then I became a psychotherapist after being a talent agent for a bunch of years. And I was like, holy crap, this is an epidemic of nobody understanding that the origin, like whatever people would come into my therapy practice and with all these different problems, whatever it may be, difficulty in their marriage, they're not satisfied in their career, eating disorder, whatever it may be. And I could literally connect the dots backwards to each and every one of them being this lack of this skill set. And so I was like, oh, this is an epidemic of people not knowing what this is,
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. So I want to go back to something that you said is like, I didn't know how to talk true. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, just being straight. Like we are really, especially as women in particular, in all the continents, right? It's not the US, it's not just the West, it's everywhere. We're raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. I mean, that's pretty much what we're taught. So it isn't just that we don't want to be rude and all. We were literally given corrupted information and then we wonder why we're unsatisfied. So I think talking true is just being truthful. But what we learned in life is that it's don't say it if someone won't like it.
So true. Do you think that is a problem with women or with people?
I mean, listen, the whole thing with I mean, I can't say how parents are raising children now because there's so much more sensitivity to gender identification and all of that stuff. That did not exist when I was growing up. So what I can say is that in a more um, we'd say heteronormative, let's say, growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, women in particular I mean, think about all the sayings, right? Where's my happy girl? Turn that frown around. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? It's like, be good, be a nice girl, be nice, be nice. This was the virtue above all others. But what we didn't learn in that process is that saying yes when you want to say no is not only not nice, it's dishonest, and it sets us up for a life of not being seen or known by the most important people in our lives. We're literally straight up giving people corrupted information about us and then being like, why do I feel so unsatisfied, unseen, unknown? And it's because you are, right? To a degree.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. That goes hand in hand, I think, with this kind of self-abandoning thing that women tend to do in relationships of like betraying themselves and what they stand for and who they are to be what that person, what they perceive that person wants them to be.
Yes, this is, it's interesting. There was so much confusion around boundaries where women would always be like, but I don't get it and I don't understand. And I don't want to be mean and I don't want to be rejecting and I don't want to be bawling people out and all of the misconceptions of like what it actually means. And so I created this quiz and you could it's literally at boundaryquiz.com if people want to take it. I came up with these archetypes because not all boundary dysfunction or disorderedness, as I call it, right? It presents the same. So, what you're talking about is when we learn to be what other people want us to be, that's having more of a chameleon style
Okay. Okay.
boundary dysfunction. It can also be like peacekeeper. You could be a pushover, right? And then there are other expressions. So a lot of times there's this confusion that like super hard boundaries means that you're a boundary boss. No, that's not what it means, right? Because it is just as dysfunctional or unsatisfying or doesn't get you what you want just as much if you are in those categories. You could be an ice queen, right? You could be a loner. You could be a powerhouse. All of those are different expressions of unhealthy boundaries. But again, it's only a 13 question quiz. It took me literally years to come up with it because it's so much. You think, make a quiz, it's easy. If it's an actual quiz that works and that is based on psychological stuff, dude, it took like, I swear, like 3 years. But it's a really good quiz now and it's only 13 questions. So if you want to know, and then I did a video for each one of the answers. Like if you ended up being a chameleon, you may do this. Perhaps these are some ideas for you. So I really made it custom to what someone's answers are because it is so much more helpful to understand how are my own boundaries disordered rather than just feeling like I don't even know what it is, but you do. So can we talk quickly about what it is? Having healthy boundaries has to do with you knowing your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, and having the ability to communicate them when you so choose.
Oh, I love that definition so much. So much.
That's it. That's it. It's so simple. And I think that if we can stick to that, like, because what it does, Mel, it puts us back like on our own side of the street, focusing in what are my preferences, my desires, my limits, my deal breakers. So much of the book, so much of what I teach in my courses, it's such a deep dive and like a love letter to self. Because once we have that piece, once we go, my preferences matter because, we learned like having a preference is like a burden to someone or like annoying or it's not, right? It's actually not. Having a preference is how people know you, accepting that it doesn't mean that people will acquiesce to what we want all the time. That's okay. But we still share our preference or our whatever the thing is so that people know us. And I think that we become so tender and so afraid. Like, if I ask for this thing and this person doesn't do this thing, oh my God, like they don't love me. I'm humiliated. It's so embarrassing. They have so much nerve after everything I've done for them. Like, wow, there's so much crap that gets kicked up. But really, are we that tender? Are we that fragile? We're so not. Let's just normalize being like, hey, I'd prefer this. I would love it if you would not give me advice that I haven't asked for. I would feel so loved right now if you would just hold space for me to figure it out because I will.
Mm.
Right now, I'm not open for input,
Mm.
but I love that you care that I'm in pain. I love it. It makes me feel so loved. Thank you.
Those are some really powerful examples that you just gave there where you can set a boundary and do it with love and compassion for yourself and for the other person listening. I really love that you said as well, like this is a real deep dive into having healthy boundaries, but not being this like ice queen or lone wolf, or these things that you said. Because I think people do, if people have struggled with boundaries especially, have this idea of like someone that has boundaries is like boom, almost like creating like a fortress, or like walls around them. And I've also experienced people who have, for me personally, I've had to learn boundaries myself
Mhm.
as someone that had a lot of codependency codes in my female lineage. Let's
Same.
talk about that. But I've also experienced being in partnership with people who have so many boundaries that it feels avoidant and almost like being blocked out entirely. Can you speak into both of these?
Sure. Well, first let's there's a lot of things that people do around boundaries. They call it boundaries. And it's really just control levers, right? It's ways of it really it can be emotionally manipulative. And I don't know that it has to be intentional. I think a lot of times people literally don't know. So they're like I'll give an example, right? Someone had said um in one of my courses, I was in the park and I was sitting on a bench. Now, in New York City, sitting on a bench, like you don't own the bench. Like you're not in your house, you're not on your couch. You're like in a public place on a bench. And she was like, and someone came and sat on the bench. And she didn't say they sat close to her. Like they sat on the other end of the bench. And she was like, and I told them that they were encroaching on my boundaries and they needed to move on. And I'm like, okay, you're misunderstanding what's happening. You don't own the bench, you don't own Central Park, you cannot boss someone around who you don't even know, and that also but the misconception was that that person encroached on her boundaries. Now, she may not want someone she doesn't know to sit on the bench. I wouldn't. This is me, not to be a New Yorker, but I would definitely be getting up and moving unless there was some reason I liked you, but goodbye. But it doesn't make the other person wrong. If my preference is, I don't want you who I don't know sitting on the end of a bench I'm sitting on, I will get my ass up and move. I will walk away from that situation as opposed to being like, you. No, that's not true. Another really good example, though, of clarity. I put this online the other day, and a lot of people were like, oh, that's so helpful. So I'll just give it to you. Is about understanding when you're in a relationship. Sometimes, let's say you have conflict where you like to go to bed early and your partner likes to come to bed late. You can try to compromise and say, hey, let's, maybe 2 nights a week we could go to bed at the same time, so maybe we can have sex or talk or fool around or whatever, and maybe you can come to that compromise. And on the other days, on the other nights, here's where it would be a boundary violation. That person may want to go to bed at 2 in the morning. That's their right. They're a grown up. If they come into the bedroom and flip on all the lights at 2 in the morning and wake you up, that now is encroaching. That's a boundary violation for you. So you have a right to say, hey, come to bed whenever you want. Do me a favor. Like put a little, a light on your head or like something. Like use your phone light instead of turning on the big lights so that you're not waking me up. Because now your choice to go to bed at 2 in the morning is encroaching on my desire to sleep. And we can make a boundary request. Again, getting clear about the whole thing with the language around boundary violations. Like, is it a violation? Some things are obvious violations, sure. But is it a violation if we have not expressed our preference, our limit, our desire, our deal breaker? No, because the person can't necessarily read your mind. And if you're acting out your displeasure in a passive aggressive way, by slamming a door, by not returning a text, by all the ways we all do it, like to a degree, right? The less you do it, the more effective you'll be, right? The indirect communication to express our displeasure is very ineffective. It's just like we're talking in meta messages and code, and it's not that satisfying. And, clients would say, oh, yeah. I was like, well, did you say anything? They'd be like, oh, yeah, she knew. That room got chilly. Trust me. She knew I was pissed. I was like, but did she know why? Are you
Uh-oh.
pantomiming? Like, why are we not? What are we
Yeah.
hinting about? Why don't you just effing say what the problem is? I was like, yeah, she knew, but she didn't actually know.
Mm.
And the healing, right? Our healing, our own self confidence comes from sharing what's happening for us. Again, doesn't have to be a control lever. Of course, we want to get our needs met. Does it mean in every relationship that we're going to be able to do that? No, not every time, but that's okay. So rather than talking in code or some kind of, I don't even know, like meta messages, if we say, "Hey, I'm bummed that you didn't keep your word on that. You said you'd be here by 8 and now we're missing the thing, and I'm bummed. Like, I've asked you this before. Can you please just text me if you're gonna be more than 10 minutes late? I would have done something else. I had time to do something else." Or if you're meeting someone and they're perpetually late and you're always early, of course, that was my life. I'd be, like, getting into an Uber so that I would be exactly on time, and then the person is 15 minutes late. I'm like, "Motherfucker, I could have walked. I would have liked to have walked." And I would clearly say, "Hey, why didn't you give me the heads up?" Because I definitely wouldn't have taken a $24 Uber. I would rather have walked. I had time to walk. And again, that is we get into this whole thing about being worried about being rude and offending people, but it's so ironic because in not speaking up and sharing how we feel, we're so pissed. We're just walking around like low key aggro all the time. Waiting, right? Right? Just waiting to, like, go off on someone. We're like, "Wow, everyone is so annoying." You're like, "Are they? Or are you just never talking true?"
Can you speak about the mother-daughter relationship? I want to talk about like just setting boundaries with family, but especially with mothers, because I feel as though, I'm just going to speak for myself. I love my mum so much. We're incredibly close, and um, she and her mum were quote unquote best friends. And that is a kind of, I know you spoke on this before, but that is a relationship that I feel we inherited or kind of inherited. Like, we're now best friends, but there's challenges with that, right? Because there's the lack of boundaries. And I think I'm speaking for myself, but I think I'm speaking for a lot of women that maybe find it challenging with these primary relationships, especially with the relationship with the mother.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, repetition, right? So exactly what you said is accurate. You inherited it because there's this thing, Freud called it repetition compulsion. I call it repeating relationship realities. We all have our way of sort of looking at it. And boundaries, especially when you are close, can be very difficult because we have a lot of silent agreements in family systems. So if you have a silent agreement with your mom that you won't have a lot of boundaries because she didn't with her mom, which equated love and closeness and camaraderie and those things, then you having those boundaries will feel like a betrayal, maybe, will feel like she's failing in some way, or she'll be pushing for something that you don't necessarily want. So here's the thing. Being grown up, we have to decide. I had to flip the script. I'm also incredibly close with my mom, who's still alive. She's 83. Um, but I got healthy through therapy in my I got into therapy at 19, and I pretty much never left. So that's a lot of decades, people. Um, I needed to lead, like, in the psychological stuff. My parents were, from upstate New York, like kind of country kids, got married. My father did well. They got divorced, but it was like nobody was like, "Yay, therapy," or "Yay, let's stop all being addicted to alcohol," or "Yay, whatever other things that I kind of dealt with and led my family down this other path." It was painful. It was painful, and that's the reality. But I loved my mother so much, and it was more painful for me to feel resentful of her. Our situation it wasn't like the best friend thing, that's different, but it was always giving me like unasked for advice and criticism. And I was like, dude, stop.
Dude.
Like it would make me
Dude.
just so mad, right? Does it make you so mad? You're like, hi, what makes you think you know what I need to do? You have no friggin' idea. What ended up happening though, so let's break down what goes on with this auto advice giving, because many of us do it as well. And we are going to get to codependency because the shit is all connected. So with moms in particular, advice, criticism, you know, I can't speak to all moms, right? Because there's a lot of mothers who are not like, I think we have a similar kind of a mother, which is one that you're actually close to and have a deep, abiding connection to. I did a whole course called, Healing the Mother Wound, because there are lots of women who have incredibly painful relationships with their mom. Either way, if you have a close relationship and your mom is giving you advice and shit that you don't want, or wants a different relationship, because here's the thing about friendship with mothers and daughters, parents in general. You can be close, you can create a deep, abiding loyalty, fondness, love. But there's a reality from a psychological point of view that being best friends is never going to be. It's not appropriate. I don't want to know about the sex you had with my father, like ever. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. There'll be never a day when I'm interested. Just please do not.
Please do not even start that.
But they kind of will want to if there isn't. I mean, not all, but it's almost like this desire to be themselves. And I remember with my mother when she was sort of getting into my parents split. My mom had an affair with her boss when I was like, whatever. My parents split when I was like 13. I have 3 older sisters. And I remember when I turned like 19, my parents never badmouthed each other when they got divorced, even though it could have been really messy and rough. It wasn't really. I mean, it was messy because my mother had an affair with her boss and I lived in a small town. But so everyone friggin' knew. It was like the IGA, the supermarket. You're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Please don't do that. But too late. Yeah, it was fun. Um, but I ended up with the when I was 19, my mom kind of wanted to like tell me things about my father and like kind of be like, well, this happened and that happened. And I couldn't explain it other than saying, after like the second time, I was like, Mom, I don't know what's happening. I remember we were in upstate New York where she lives at a country fair having ice cream. And I was like, when you talk about dad, even if you're not saying something bad, for some reason, it makes me feel like I'm bad. Like I want to defend him so bad. I don't care what you're saying. And it's so makes me feel so bad. And she was like, oh my God, babe, I don't want to make you feel bad. She was like, and I was like, but I'm telling you it does. And I reminded her, like as we were kind of going forward, and she stopped. She really did stop. And if she ever would come back to it, I would be like, hey, please no. And I remember one time she was like, oh, so you girls can tell me everything, but I can't tell you. And I was like, yeah, that's called being the fucking parent, Mom. And with my kids, I will not burden them with my like interpersonal bullshit. Like, no, I mean, I didn't say that. I thought that, but because she literally was like, so I can't. I was like, correct. Right. That's how it goes.
Yes, I love that. I think for me, and by the way, amazing boundaries at such a young age. Like, wow.
I don't even, yep. But I didn't even know it was boundaries. What it was this goes to my mother though. She always cared about what I thought and how I felt. Like from my littlest memory, I was teeny, like close to the ground, and she would come all the way down and be like, "Wait, you like that? Wait, you don't want to wear that sweater scratchy? No, you could take it off. It's okay." Like she was never that mother that was like, "Just friggin' do what I say." So I think that there was a safety that I knew if she understood how I felt, how it made me feel, she would not want to provoke that feeling in me.
And I think that is really key for anyone listening that is struggling with setting boundaries with a family member that they love very dearly and don't want to upset the relationship or make them feel rejected, is to put the focus on it makes me feel like this. Would you say that's accurate?
I do. And I think that there's a lot of ways in the in the book, there's a whole entire chapter towards the end though, right? Because I could have just done a whole book on scripts. But if you don't understand the internal mechanisms, your downloaded boundary blueprint, all of these things that go along with why you relate to boundaries the way you do, why you have your personal struggles, all the words in the world won't help you because you won't be able to deliver them, right? You could do it once, but you won't be able to stay because it is the unconscious material that is driving the behavior. So the beginning, the book really it has to go in chronological order because we are unpacking those things. And I think that I give you a whole bunch of scripts about saying we want to be mindful that my mother wasn't making me feel that way. I was letting her know that her sharing those things, my experience of it was that uncomfortable, painful, threatened, um, split loyalty, all of those things. But again, taking responsibility for she didn't make me feel that way. I felt that way. And so some of these things may sound like semantics where you're like what's the difference? But it's important that we get mindful of what is my side of the street and what is your side of the street? Like what is your side of the street? What is your mom's side of the street? It is so important. And when we are codependent or high functioning codependent, as I renamed it, it's very difficult. We're unclear. So this is when we overfunction, overfeel, overdeliver. We are stepping onto the other side of the street. We love someone, they're in pain, and we're like, okay, so I've made a whole chart of what you should do. Like I've made some phone calls. I know some people. I called this person. I've called the moving van. Like, do you know what I'm talking about, Mel?
I know exactly what you're talking about. This is like over functioning. This is like, for me, this reminds me of the mother archetype, or like the shadow of the mother archetype, which is just overdoing, and it's out of love, but it's actually, it's too much. It's controlling.
Yes, and here's the thing that when you really get what this is and what it's doing, I got to tell you, this, I still struggle because this is a discipline to have healthy boundaries. But I misunderstood what I was doing when I was this high functioning codependent. So I'm going to quickly give you the background on that name, right? Codependency is one thing. I had all of these. Once I stopped being a talent agent, became a psychotherapist, I had all of these women who were drawn to my work, very similar to the way that I was in the world, super high functioning, very successful, incredibly capable women, but still coming in. And every person who came in, as I was saying before, I'm like, how could boundaries still be the thing? But it is the thing. They might have be crushing it in business, and somehow there was still a boundary disaster in their romantic life, or with their family of origin, or with their friends, even. So I would say I would notice them overfunctioning, overdoing. They'd be overfunctioning and other people would be underfunctioning in their relationships. And I would say, "Hey, I'm noticing this codependency." And they'd be like, "Oh no, no, dude, you don't get it. There's no friggin' way. I'm not dependent on anybody. I'm making all the dough. I'm doing everything. What do you mean? Everyone's dependent on me." So I understood that they did not know what codependency was. That they were, I think that Melody Beattie's Codependent No More, right? This was the seminal text for decades where people are like, oh, I'm not codependent because I'm not involved with a gambler, with an addict, with a heroin addict, an alcoholic, right? We all had this thought that codependency meant enabling someone to do drugs or drink. No, so much more than that. And as much as Melody Beattie has updated her stuff, and she has, it's still absolutely valid. I knew that there was something else there too for me because I never identified as codependent for the same exact reasons. So I renamed it, came up with a new definition because you can do that when you're a therapist. I just made it up because I'm like, this is what's real for my clients. So high functioning codependency which means, I'll tell you, that you are overly invested in the feeling states, the decisions, the outcomes, the circumstances of the people in your life to the detriment of your internal peace, your financial well-being, your physical health, let's say, because you're overdoing. Now, we're all invested in those things for the people we love because this is part of being a loving person, right? It's got to be to the detriment of you in some way, right? Of course, if someone we love is in pain, we're going to be concerned, right? But how you can tell right now, those of you listening, how you can tell if it's tipping over into codependency is I want you right now to check your urgency, right? If your friend, your lover has a problem on a scale of 1 to 10, is your urgency about helping them fix and come to a resolution with their problem, is it like a 10? Meaning it really, really feels like it's happening to you. That is codependency, right? Being concerned, but being able to put it down. That's love. I ask my husband, he's got something going on. I say, how can I best support you, babe? What would really actually help? Rather than what I would have done 20 years ago, because we've been together for 25, is I would literally have been picking up the phone, not consulting with him. I'd be making phone calls. I'd be like, okay, so I spoke to this person. This is what we're doing, you know? He's like,
Yeah.
hi, what are we doing about my problem that has to do with anyway?
Yeah, it's like if you have a problem, it automatically becomes my problem and my job
Yes.
to fix it. I think again, there's like it feels like the over mothering role that we can take on with partners, children, friendships. We make it our job to fix it.
No, there was nobody who I couldn't become codependent with. My mail carrier, Phil. Like, I'm not kidding. I was like, Phil, you need to get into therapy. My hair colorist, like anybody. It wasn't even reserved for just people I really love. I was like, I will help all the people all the time.
Because it is my job and I can, because I am a superwoman. You're so right about like the link between being a highly capable individual and successful, high achieving to a degree has created a lot of success and accomplishment, because then it's like, well, I can, so I should.
Yes, but let's look at the downside. Let's look at why
Yeah.
you shouldn't,
Yes,
shall
please.
we? Because it's incredibly tempting. Here's the thing. All of these women were coming into my practice having what they thought were autoimmune disorders, women coming in their fifth and sixth decade of life. They were CFOs. They were famous. They were like, these are people who had all the money in the world. And they were kind of like, hey, is this how I'm supposed to feel? I've checked all the friggin' boxes for 5 decades. I really thought this was going to feel better. And I'm like, well, it's not how you're supposed to feel if you've been checking boxes that someone else laid out for you. If you have had the disease to please in a way, kids are on track, money in the bank, kids going to Ivy League schools. Like I had many women like this who were like, I feel like a shell. I really thought I'd be happier now. So one thing is if we build our life on codependent relationships, there's a lot of lack of satisfaction in the end because think about it. How much of the time do you tell your friend what to do? They don't do it. And you're like, I bet he just listened to me. She wouldn't still be with that idiot. Like she wouldn't be crying right now. I told her to leave him 3 years ago. I gave her a therapist. She never called them. Right. Mm-hmm. So those are a bunch of things that are not fun to look at. But another thing
Mhm.
is when we auto advice give, when we immediately go into like war mode for the people we love, we are centering ourselves in their situation. And that was so ego wise, incredibly painful for me to get. I was like, oh my God, I thought I was Mother Teresa. Holy crap. I'm not. I'm literally not. Like, I'm oh, so painful. But once I got it, it really cured me because I was like, ew and no. I had a situation, I'll tell you really quickly if we have time. I had a situation with one of my siblings who was always in a, she was like the scapegoat of the family, always in a bad relationship. She was in a relationship, and no, this is literally, there's no need to embellish this story because it's true. She was living in the woods without running water, with a crackhead who was physically abusive. And she was, by the way, I also didn't say she was an active alcoholic at the time, had animals, no running water. How are you having, what is happening? So I was endlessly trying to get her out of that situation. I was money, people, get a lawyer, anything. But it was so painful to always be listening to her telling me something so brutal. And so I basically said to my therapist, listen, I don't know like what the deal is. I was crying. I was like, what should I do? And she said, Terri, let me ask you something. What makes you think you know what Jenna needs to learn in this life? And I was like, well, I think we could both agree she doesn't need to learn it with a crackhead in the woods with no fucking running water. and,
I mean, that's a fair point.
and she said, I actually cannot agree because I'm not God and I don't know. So you think that you can fix this for her, but you can't. Can I tell you what's really going on? I was like, oh, please do, Bev, because I apparently have no idea. And she said, you've worked for 2 decades to have a pretty harmonious life. You're in a happy relationship. You have your found family. You're sober. You're blah, blah, blah. And she's like, and your sister's dumpster fire of a life is like completely fucking with your peace. So you really would like her pain to end so your pain could end and you could get on with your life. And again, going back to the Mother Teresa comment, you're like, how not Mother Teresa is that shit? But it's so true, right? I was like, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And she said, so my whole thing was, so am I off the hook? Kind of, I thought as a sister, I had to do all that I could. And she was like, but this is where I really learned about boundaries. She was like, hey, but that's not on your side of the street. If and when your sister wants help, will you help her? I was like, of course. She was like, then tell her that and then step back. You don't have to let her tell you about this abusive relationship every day or at all. You can tell her it is too triggering for you, too painful for you, and that you love her and that when she's ready, you'll be there. And I did that. And 9 months later, she was ready and I was there. And she's been sober ever since. And that was decades ago. And, she went back to school.
Wow. Wow.
You know?
This is so fascinating. There's one more thing that I want to explore with you on this, and it's boundaries with self. Would you say that like creating boundaries just with yourself is like a really good starting point for people, and how might they go about that?
Yes, it's so good. It's such a good point. And it's really what I start with in the book is internal boundaries, which is exactly what you just said, boundaries with self. This is where do we follow through with our word for ourselves and for other people, but for ourselves, like where do we do the things we say we're going to do? How often are we like last on our own list where we're like, I'm going to get up and I want to do this. And then you're like, someone else needs something. You're like, okay, I'm going to do that thing. Whatever you need, that's what I'm doing. Exactly. It's also keeping your word to other people too and following through. It's knowing yourself. It's how self-regulated are your emotions, right? So I think boundaries with yourself is it's a great place to we explore. How do I relate to myself? What is my inner dialogue? Like there's all of those types of things in the book. And then the most simple, right? The most simple, if we're looking out, is understanding when we say yes, when we want to say no, we are abandoning ourselves, right? And we're also, most of the time, listen, when you say yes, you either do something begrudgingly, right? You're like, I can't believe Betty asked me to go to that thing again, like that stupid chef's where I got to buy like pots and pans and shit or whatever the thing is Betty keeps asking you to do. Do you know what I mean? Those people have like home parties where you're like, stop. Sorry. My friends know. I'm like, I will send you a check to not go to that party. I can't even pretend I want the pampered chef or jewelry or whatever shit you're doing. No thanks, but I will send you money if you need it. Anyway, moving on. The first thing we want to do is just stop the auto yes, because that a lot of times this is just a habit, right? We're so habituated to just be pleasing so much of the time. This people pleasing syndrome, the disease to please, as Harriet Breaker coined in like 2003. We just got to put a pattern interruption. And how we do that is have like 3 or 4 things to say where you guys listening, you can do an experiment. For the next 7 days, you're not allowed to agree to anything in the moment. I mean, unless like your house is on fire and the fireman comes and says, "Do you want to leave?" Yes, you can say, "Yes, I do." Besides that, there is nothing that requires an instant answer from you. We think it does. It doesn't. People can wait. People are manipulative. They're like, "Well, I need an answer by 3 o'clock today." Okay, well, if you need an answer by 3 o'clock today and it's 1 o'clock today, that answer is no, pal, because poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency for me. I don't make decisions like that.
I like that. I like that.
Right? And it's also someone just mind effing us. Like people are so good. You'll see in chapter, I think it's 10, in the Boundary Destroyer chapter in the book, I get really into all of the psychological and emotional manipulation that people who are kind of emotional predators, like we have to talk about it because the regular boundary rules don't apply. You can't just you can't deal with someone who's an emotional predator like they're not. Because if you do, then you will not be protected. So it's important to see like that's one of the things, like creating an emergency and make that then expecting that you're like, "Oh, it's an emergency." No, that's your reality, pal. It's not an emergency for me because I am the
Yes.
queen of my reality. Like you don't dictate what my reality is. I do. I'm the decider in my life. And so part of it is a great place to start is to just stop the auto yes and start to really observe yourself. I'm going to give you a couple of things you can say right now. And I also have a gift about it's boundaries and codependency for your listeners that they're going to love, which I'll give you that after. So right now you start with someone asks you to do something, you can say, hey, I need to check with my partner, right? I'll get back to you tomorrow. We can always be kind though. We can, especially if it's people we like, we can always say, "Oh my God, thank you. I love that you always think of me when you make these plans. Thank you so much. I have to look at my calendar. I don't know if I'm free, but I just appreciate you. Thank you." Right? There's always these ways that when we imagine saying no, and if we're fearful of it, we think that it's going to be this stark, cold rejection, And it doesn't have to be. Even if I'm saying to someone, right, when people invite me to like outside concerts and shit, like I hate stuff like that. So even if they love it, right, and they'll be like, "We're going to go see James Taylor. It's going to be great." And I just always say, "Hey, I'm a no to outside concerts. I'm always a yes to you. So let's do lunch. I love you. Have a great time." My friends don't even ask me anymore. They know I'm like, I hate the sun, I hate bugs, and I hate people talking while I'm trying to listen to music. Like, why do I want to go to that thing? I don't. So
I love that.
Yeah. What you end
I
up
love that. I'm a no for this, but I'm a yes for you.
Yes.
So let's do lunch.
Yeah. There's so many ways. But when you guys listening, sorry, I'm going to try to just long way around the barn to get back to the 7-day thing, Jesus, is just you start to, it becomes illuminated how often you feel compelled to say yes. And when we can interrupt that pattern by saying, "Thank you for thinking of me, I'll let you know." You can even say, I made this up for my clients years ago, the language. "I have a 24-hour decision-making policy. I'll get back to you tomorrow." People laugh, you can say it tongue in cheek. But here's the thing, we should all have minimally a 24-hour decision-making policy because when you say maybe instead of yes, it is so much easier to honor your no. And when your no can't be, like your yes can't be trusted because you say yes when you want to say no. And think about it, people listening right now. You know your friends who do this. You know them. We're all like, oh yeah, Betty said yes, but you know the way she is. So probably 50% chance she's going to show up. We don't trust you. When you say yes, when you want to say no, we don't trust you because we know you have the disease to please.
Oh, Terri, you are just so full of just such deep, potent knowledge and wisdom. I'm so grateful for this conversation. I always ask my guests these same three questions to wrap up our interview. The first is, what is one thing right now that you're loving?
I'm actually loving being home on Crackpot Farm. We got 3 geese, we got 10 chickens, which we've never had before, so I'm loving being in the country with my husband.
Beautiful. What is something that turns you on?
You know what? These conversations. I'm so in love with the fact that this book is finally out into the world. And I've been talking about boundaries for decades, and now everyone wants to talk about boundaries, and I love it.
And when was the last time you experienced magic?
This morning when I came outside, I always ground. Like I wake up and I don't even have my eye mask off yet. And I walk downstairs after I pee and walk outside. And I just was standing in this beautiful moss patch that I love by this tree that's about 280 years old. And every morning, this is this grounding moment of thinking about all the years that that tree was there. I love trees. Like I'm really into nature. So I'll lean into it. I'll hug it, you know, and that is a magical way. So that was literally an hour and a half ago.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we're going to link everything in the show notes so people can take the quiz. They can get the gift.
Yes. I'll tell you the link for the gift is boundaryboss.me/Mel.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And everyone definitely go out and buy a copy of Boundary Boss. Terri, where can everyone come and hang out with you and get more of your magic and wisdom in their life?
Go to boundarybossbook.com. You can find me at terricole.com. I hang out most on Instagram, I would say, which is just at Terri Cole. I just had my 2 millionth download of my podcast, The Terri Cole Show, which is great fun. You'll have to come on, Mel. Yeah, and then I also have a free group on Facebook that has about 30,000 women in it. It's just for women. But if you're interested in this kind of conversation, we just have a lot of just talking and sharing and that type of stuff. It's called Real Love Revolution with Terri Cole on Facebook.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Terri. Well, we're going to head into our community for a couple more personal questions. But for everyone else, thank you. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
I could say the same to you. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was so much fun.